Well, thank you all for being here. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today. It's Dr. Patrick Gonzalez. He's a UC Berkeley professor, a climate scientist, and an author of 4 IPCC reports. And he's newly appointed the executive director of the Institute of Parks, People, and Biodiversity at UC Berkeley. Some of you may know Patrick. He's worked extensively with the National Park Service and others here in the Bay Area. I first became acquainted with Patrick through his and his colleagues' work in 2015 to quantify California's carbon stock for the state in its efforts to meet greenhouse gas reduction targets for ecosystems. And that work and its subsequent updates really forms the foundation for demonstrating the role of forest conservation and management in California in mitigating global climate change. Patrick spoke at the 2018 Open Space Conference at the Craneway Pavilion, where it'll be again this year on May 10th, where he delivered a hopeful message of climate change. It was grounded in reality and science, of course, but it was hopeful nonetheless. And last May, Patrick gave a keynote about climate, wildfire, and solutions to the International Wildfire the International Association of Wildfire. I'm blanking on the International Association of Wildland Fire. Sorry, Wildland Fire is what got me. Where he gave an address similar to what he's going to give today. So we're really, really excited to have Patrick here with us today. Always been impressed with his solutions-oriented and hopeful message. So we're thrilled to have you with us today, Patrick. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. And thanks to everybody for your interest. Do you see my slide? Great. Well, and I invite people to turn on their cameras. Actually, I have you in the corner of my screen, and it's this is part of our a nice interaction that we can have today. Natural fire is essential to the health of forests and woodlands in California, but sadly, fire can generate tragedy, like in the Oakland Hills fire that killed 25 people and destroyed homes close to here. I'm in Berkeley. And of course, you've all experienced other fires throughout the Bay Area. A natural fire promotes the seeding and growth of many tree species, yet scientific research shows that human-caused climate change from cars, power plants, deforestation, other human sources has increased wildfire above natural levels across Western North America. And this is combined with outdated policies of suppressing all fires, even natural ones. That's created unnatural accumulations of coarse woody debris and small trees that fuel fires. So today I'll be covering these issues and as Tom said, a science-based optimism. I'll be covering these issues in these 5 sections. And as you heard in the introduction, I'm grateful now at the opportunity to lead the University of California, Berkeley Institute for Parks, People, and Biodiversity. And just briefly, we are an institute at Berkeley that is advancing science and solutions for conservation management and policy. And a #1 goal is halting climate change. And of course, we have goals of conserving biodiversity and improving the experience of nature for all. And so we share the same mission as Together Bay Area, and many or all of your organizations today. And just briefly, here are some of the past and ongoing results from the past 5 years. I just started a month ago, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to take science-based action on climate change, biodiversity loss, and the experience of nature for all. getting back to human-caused climate change, the human cause of climate change is important because it points us to the fundamental solution. Cars, power plants, deforestation, other human sources pump 11 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere every year, more than double what forests, soil, or approximately double what forest, soil, oceans can naturally absorb. This and other results today will come from the most recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And as you heard, I've served as a lead author, and our reports just came out on impacts last year. You'll see. So you saw that deforestation was a major source. An area that's 7 to 10 times the area of the state of California burns globally through the year. And a lot of that is natural, but actually 80% of that is not natural. 80% of that is active deforestation for agriculture, for timber harvesting, mainly in tropical forests. So I'm giving you the big picture of climate change and wildfire here, and we're going to narrow down to the Bay Area. But we are all part of this global phenomenon. I want to emphasize that our work here in the Bay Area is very important. It links to this global problem, and that's why you're going to see a lot of material also on the global issue of fire. So human activities have increased carbon dioxide to its highest level in over 2 million years. And you see this vertical line at the very end of the graph here, shooting up way above the natural range of variability. This graph is the past 3 million years on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, it's the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Consequently, temperature has risen to its highest level in over 120,000 years. And IPCC has analyzed all of the different potential causal factors, and the observed heating from weather station measurements, the gray bar on the left, exactly matches the net effect of human activities, this first red bar on the right. And you see the very small bars here on the far right, those are the natural sources, less than 1%. So human activities have caused climate change. And the increased energy that climate change brings is equivalent to burning one of those old incandescent light bulbs over every square meter of the earth at the height of a tall person, day and night, every day, continuously. That's a lot of heat. So the principal impact, of course, of this is an increase of temperature throughout the year, and the global average surface temperature increases 1.1 degrees Celsius. So that's like 2 degrees Fahrenheit, more in the Arctic and in the Antarctic. Narrowing in on the United States, colleagues and I analyzed for the first time the spatial patterns of heating across the United States at 800-meter spatial resolution, and the darkest reds here are an increase of over 2.5 degrees Celsius per century. That's almost 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and we see the highest rates of heating actually at high latitudes in Alaska and in the southwestern United States, especially Southern California. And now coming to the Bay Area. So the global average, remember, is about 1.1, and we see actually some parts of the Bay Area in Marin County and Santa Clara County have experienced heating that's greater than the global average. And this is just a graph of the average temperature for Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which you know is a national park in San Francisco, San Mateo, and Marin counties. And for the land area of the park, you see the steady upward march of average annual temperatures, statistically significant. And this mirrors what's occurred across the Bay Area. This map is similar to the others. The darkest, except it's for precipitation, total annual precipitation, and darkest blues are an increase of 50% per century, and the darkest browns are a decrease of 50% per century. And climate change is an input of energy into the atmospheric system, which expresses itself as more convection and more storms. And so a tendency for more rainfall. However, it redistributes the energy in the atmosphere in such a way that that it robs moisture from some parts of the globe. And so we've experienced that here, and I'll talk a little bit more about the drought, the historic drought in the Southwest, including California, but you see that here and in parts of Alaska. And so this is now zooming in on the San Francisco Bay Area. And as you see, total annual precipitation has increased historically since 1895, except in San Francisco County and Marin County. This has all occurred, of course, at the same time as outdated policies have suppressed natural fire. This is Tahoe National Forest, and so you see a lot of coarse woody debris, a lot of dead wood, small trees. And this graph is from Yosemite National Park, and it shows the fire history back 4 centuries. And you see that during the time of the indigenous peoples, they effectively used fire, managed fire on the landscape at this moderate level. And then with colonization, the Spanish conquest, and then the European American settlement of California, starting in 1849, you see more timber harvesting, more accidental burning. Gold mining caused a lot of burning, and so you see that peak. And then federal and state policies starting in the early 1900s suppressed all fire, even natural ones, so it crashes. It crashes at the end of the time series, but we're going to see how actually it's started to go up again because of climate change. I'm going to show you now a series of examples that have gone through the 2 scientific procedures of detection and attribution. And detection is finding a cause that's statistically significant from natural variability. Attribution is looking at the different potential causal factors and determining the fraction that's due to human-caused climate change. We saw one example of this when I showed you the vertical bars of the different causes of the heating of the Earth. So all of the examples I'm going to show you relative to drought and wildfire have gone through these 2 statistical procedures and determined that human-caused anthropogenic climate change is the cause, and not urbanization, not other non-climate factors. And the most fundamental fact with which we're living right now is a drought that has been the most severe since the 1500s. And this graph is actually a graph of soil moisture that goes back 12 centuries. And you see that it bounces up and down over time. And that's because precipitation in this Mediterranean climate naturally bounces up and down year to year. However, since the Industrial Revolution, we've superimposed that interannual variability of precipitation on the slow upward march of heat. And so, whereas before in California, a natural period of a couple of years of low precipitation might not have produced a lot of permanent on the ground impacts, because you could the environment could recover afterwards. Now it's superimposed on this heating, which makes it much more difficult. We have some irreversible impacts, some from tree mortality as pictured here in Yosemite National Park. So this drought, and the California part of it, and California is part of this this trend. This drought is the fundamental impact of climate change that's really affecting everything else, particularly wildfire. And so human-caused climate change has intensified the heat that drives wildfire. And increased wildfire season up to 2 months, including in parts of California, like here, the area of this astounding fire tornado on the east side of the Sierra in 2020. Again, wildfire is natural and necessary, but climate change has doubled the area burned by wildfire across the Western U.S. over natural levels since 1984. And actually, this trend has continued upward since this particular research. Actually, the burned area in the United States is 10 times what it was in the 1980s. But part of that is climate change, and part of that, again, is the old outdated policies. The part that's climate change is this orange part. And so it's a doubling above the non-climate change levels, including the rim fire there in Yosemite National Park. And this trend actually holds in part for national parks and protected areas across the United States and Canada. And as Tom mentioned, colleagues and I analyzed for the first time the carbon balance of ecosystems wall to wall across California. And our results showed that 2/3 of the emissions from natural ecosystems in California came from the 6% of the land that burned. So green areas here are areas of increase in carbon during that period. Brown areas are areas of decrease, and so the net effect is this red bar, a net loss. And you see actually the brown areas are very clearly fire perimeters, and the most extensive fire perimeters actually are, of course, outside of the Bay Area. They're in Chaparral in Southern California. And you have a bunch of smaller fires, smaller in area, but still high severity in the Sierra Nevada and in the Klamath Mountains. The net effect, though, has been a loss of carbon. Elsewhere in the southwestern U.S., the climate change has reduced natural regeneration of or post-fire natural regeneration of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, which are the lower elevation, kind of drier zone conifers. In the Bay Area, they would actually be the higher elevation. We actually don't have too much of this in the Bay Area. But the point is that the soil moisture going below the threshold that permits natural regeneration of even these more arid seasonal arid species. So the wildfire, the drought, and infestations of bark beetles have all contributed to a doubling of tree death across the western United States. Haven't seen as much of this extensive mortality in the San Francisco Bay Area, except in Point Reyes National Seashore. You do see mortality in bishop pine, but that's because of this canker fungus. It's kind of a different phenomenon than this. Okay, so that's what's already occurred, observed, measured on the ground, detection and attribution analyses. I'm going to show you what might occur if climate change continues. And this graph shows time on the horizontal axis, and then the degrees of heating above the pre-industrial era. And the pre-industrial era here is defined as 1850 to 1900. That's the baseline. And so that black line is the global weather station record. That's what's already been measured. And this set of 5 colored lines are the emission scenarios used in the most recent IPCC reports. And, you know, projecting climate change is not like predicting the weather. Weather predictions are probabilistic. And actually, they were quite accurate in the past 3 weeks of atmospheric rivers that we've had. I'll say 80% chance of rainfall. It's because during the past 100 years, when the atmosphere had similar characteristics, 8 of the 10 times it rained. You can do that for short-term weather, but climate change depends on human activities. And so each of these 5 lines is an emissions scenario that's based on human population, on energy use, on economic activity. And so climate change is within our power. It's really human activities that decide which line we're going to follow. And actually, which line do you think we are following? Just you can just shout out as if we were around in person.
8.5.
Okay, Tom says 8.5. Anybody have another estimate?
Oh, that was Stu. I'll go with
I'm
7.0.
sorry. Stu, you'll go to the 7. Okay.
4.5 or 7.
You know, we were actually this is part of the good news. This is a preview of the good news at the not good news, but some of the hopeful signs is that we used to be along 8.5. We've now taken enough action that we're currently slightly below 7. So we have made progress. I'm going to talk a little bit more though. These are transient solutions, meaning you see it just ends at 2,100 here. Well, those lines, you see, they keep going up. So being at 7 rather than 8.5 is kind of good, but it's not good because actually that line keeps going up. We to avoid the most drastic impacts of climate change, we need actually to be at one of these blue lines. Okay. We have 20 minutes left, so I'm going to keep zooming here. And this is a graph for the area of Muir Woods National Monument. Horizontal axis, projected temperature change. Vertical axis, projected precipitation change. So the black dot is 0, 0. That's historical. And each of those 4 dots are what used to be the 4 main emission scenarios, and they're similarly numbered. Anyway, what this shows us is that the future is a constellation. It's a point cloud. Again, we have two types of variation here, and one is the human activity going from green to red, the emission scenario, and the other is computing. Each of those small dots is a different general circulation model of the atmosphere. But everything's getting hotter. But you see that some of them project an increase of total annual precipitation, some project a decrease. But even for projections that project a decrease or an increase in precipitation, because of that increase in heat, it can still get drier, right? Because it's still, especially here in our Mediterranean climate, might not, even if it rains a lot in January and February, it's still dry, and it still becomes dry in August, September. Okay, and part of that is drought. Again, like I said, that confluence of the historically high temperature and the random lows in precipitation. Currently a 1 in 100-year drought under the highest emissions. It could occur every year. Every year, a 1 in 100-year drought, and under the RCP 8.5, that highest. And this actually is one of our East Bay regional parks in a slightly dry area. One of the potential risks of this is death of coast redwood trees, which are, as you know, live for thousands of years, but rely on fog. Just a 2.5 degree increase, so a modest heating could reduce the range of coast redwood by a half, including in the Santa Cruz Mountains and then Marin County. Globally, climate change at 4 degrees could increase burned area 50 to 70%, including in the giant sequoia groves in the Sierra. But zooming into the lower 48, a modest level of heating could still increase burned area by 4 times, so 400%. Symbolized by the recent LNU lightning complex fire here in the Bay Area. And then zooming in on California, Leroy Westerling. I think this is part of the toolkits that Tom spoke about. I just spoke with Leroy the other day, and I think they're distributing spatial data for this. If you don't already have it. Anyway, for California, some areas could experience a tripling of fire frequency, but that's only in the current projections, that's only limited to some parts of the Bay Area, San Mateo County, Point Reyes. Okay, and then extreme events, climate change could increase astounding events like pictured here, this pyrocumulonimbus in 2020. At the same time, people have been moving into fire-prone areas, and 25 million people in the United States and 13 million houses, and sadly, tragically, this led to a lot of people dying in Paradise, California. And so we have these 3 phenomena occurring at the same time: global climate change, and then the legacy of old, outdated policies, and then people living and moving into fire-prone areas. And so it's kind of 3 sources of risk. Adaptation is a adjustment of resource management actions, and we basically have 3 fire regimes and 3 fundamental types of responses, and where you have this naturally high frequency but low severity fire, letting natural fires burn and intentionally burning fires reduces risks. And I know that's not it's not an option for most of the Bay Area. We're going to get to that. In Chaparral, like here in Southern California, where you naturally, and actually in the Bishop Pine in Point Reyes, where you naturally have this low frequency but high severity fire, meaning standard replacement fire. It doesn't happen very often, maybe every 70 to 100 years, but when it does, it naturally burns everything down to the ground. You're startled when you look at this, but if you have good rainfall in 1 or 2 years, you see the manzanita resprouting from the burned from the root crowns, from the burned root crowns. Okay, the third case is ecosystems where fire is naturally absent or rare. That's like tropical forest or Arctic tundra. And it's actually a complete cessation of intentional burning there. But getting back to the Bay Area, really more pertinent to you, really the main adaptation measure here is targeted vegetation reduction and invasive species removal. And of course, the East Bay Regional Parks and a lot of the other agencies have been actively doing this. This assumes an even greater importance under climate change, removing vegetation, including eucalyptus. And that's really kind of the main tool that you have. A caution, though, sometimes it's a temptation to use that vegetation reduction as an excuse for timber harvesting. But actually, timber harvesting can increase fire severity. Published research shows that it can increase fire severity in the disturbed forests that remain. And of course, indigenous peoples, including like here, the Yurok and the Karuk in Northern California, use cultural prescribed burning, and it had dual purposes: reducing high severity fire, benefiting traditional plants. Here's prescribed burning trail right here in Marin County. Just emblematic of upgrading policies from suppressing all fires to preventive use of natural fire where possible, and where it's not possible, then targeted vegetation reductions. Okay, so though that's an adaptation, that's actually coping with climate change, but it doesn't get at the fundamental cause. And so in the last few minutes, I'll talk about the fundamental cause. Every gram, every kilogram of carbon produces an incremental increase in heat. The heating of the earth is directly proportional to how much carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases we pump into the atmosphere. So we can back calculate how much carbon we have left. And so that my colleagues and I in the IPCC have really determined that limiting the heating to 1.5 to 2 degrees is essential to avoiding the most drastic impacts of climate change. And that's actually the origin of the global policy, the Paris Agreement. It came from the science. Well, actually, I'm going to update this slide because we only have 120 billion tons left in our budget. And but what actually doesn't change is that it's still around 2032 or so when we hit that at current levels. So this requires us to cut emissions in half by 2030 and to zero by 2050. To zero by 2050. The California goal is actually zero by 2045. And part of that is natural. It's stopping tropical deforestation. But one benefit of natural fire management prescribed burning is an increase in carbon stocks. The bottom case here, when you have that low intensity, that low severity fire along the ground, it leaves the big trees to get bigger and larger and store carbon, unlike the catastrophic fire here on the top case. In the Bay Area, vegetation reduction substitutes for the prescribed burning. Of course, the coast redwoods serve this globally important purpose, the most carbon per square on the ground. And I did talk about this at a Crane Wave Pavilion, that the national parks in California contain enough, the equivalent amount of carbon to 1 year of emissions from everybody in Los Angeles and all those other cities, 7 million Americans. It's a lot, but it's actually not a lot because it's only 1 year. 1 year, all the cars and fossil fuel burning of those people can burn the equivalent of all the giant sequoia and all the redwood and the Joshua trees. So that points to the necessity of cutting fossil fuel emissions. And I'll focus on one solution here: transportation, which produces more pollution in the United States than any other sector. And if US passenger cars and light trucks were their own separate country, they would be the 8th biggest carbon polluter in the world, more than Canada and France combined. Like everything you see there in that graph. So cutting our carbon pollution from cars is essential. And we are really fortunate to have a great public transit system in the Bay Area. And just riding BART, cuts your emissions almost 90%. And walking. I live a car-free life, and I encourage all of you to, and you can cut your carbon pollution up to 99%. And this is the Ohlone Greenway right here in Berkeley and Albany. A sign of hope is that in California, we actually cut greenhouse gas emissions 11% at the same time as population was increasing 17%. So we cut emissions while population was increasing, and that's because we became more efficient. The emissions per person went down 24%. The emissions per dollar of economic production went down 45%. So that's renewable energy, energy efficiency, public transit, other sustainable actions. And in the United States, actually, renewable energy has exceeded coal since 2019, the first time since 1880s. And renewable energy has continued to go up above coal. So, our hard work is paying off, but it needs to continue. And the IPCC, the latest analyses show that we can attain that goal with concerted action at all levels: governments, companies, individuals, you and me together, using existing technologies and behaviors can cut our carbon pollution and save Bay Area open space and all of nature. So thanks.
Excellent. Please join me in thanking Patrick for an excellent talk.